Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am East, and I'm coming to you from Boise, Idaho with a really good episode today. I got a chance to talk to Nick Mulvey. If you don't know Nick Mulvey, you should definitely get into his work. He is a musician, typically known as a singer-songwriter. I'm not sure if he identifies with that nomenclature, but he's one of the better ones. He's from the UK. And he's one of the founding members of the band, the Portico Quartet, if you're familiar with that music. But he's been on his own for a while, I think about since 2011. And he's released several albums and EPs. One of them was nominated for a Mercury Prize. And his latest album, I'm pretty sure it was called Wake Up Now, which I was listening to on Tidal, like in high res the other day. And I was jamming on that. But Nick's really cool because the way he and I got connected, he did a rework for the Ram Dass record. If you haven't heard that track of his, Please Pass the Bliss, the Nick Mulvey rework, definitely head over to your favorite place that you listen to music or eastforest.org and check it out. It's on the Reworks album because it's one of my favorites from the whole experience. It's got such a cool jam. And the process of how that happened was I'm not super active on social media. I do go on there to kind of keep an eye on what's going on, and sometimes I, engage as best I can. And I was looking at Isabel from my management sort of put stuff into the stories that other people have posted, and I was looking at what was in there. And one of them was from a guy named Nick Mulvey, and he had just posted something about the Ram Dass record, like he liked it or something like that. And for some reason, his name popped up in my brain like as familiar. Nick Mulvey. How do I know that? I think I know that guy. And I tapped on his profile and I was like, oh, right, this guy's awesome. And then I shot an email over to Isabel and I said, maybe we should reach out to Nick to see if he'd like to perhaps be involved with these reworks. And as fate would have it, we did. And thankfully, he was interested in being a part of it. It was just good timing. And as all of them worked out, he was just one of the ones that was meant to be. And I would consider him a devotee of Maharaji and Ram Dass. And as many of us, we just wanted to support Ram Dass, and he wanted to as well. So we engaged in this really beautiful process of connecting about what he could do. And just to give you some backstory, it's kind of fun. We didn't really get into this in the podcast. I'll just tell you briefly. I remember we had a conversation, again, he was in the UK, so we always had this big time difference. And we got on a WhatsApp video call, and he was spending his time with his wife and his family in Ibiza, which looked awesome. And I was like, I don't know, I'm thinking you could do some guitar, maybe some vocalizations, and we'll weave Ram Dass into that, really any track you want. So he sent us some tracks, and he was in the studio messing around with it, and he basically did that, and he started adding in some other things like some synths and some like percussion and things like that. And then he kind of got to a place creatively. He was like, I'd like to now let you take a pass at it or see what you want to do with it. And he gave me lots of direction, like, I want this energy and this feeling and at this moment and yada, which was fantastic. And I love putting on that producer hat and just trying to drop into someone else's world and be like, I want to fulfill your vision on this. So I was in China at the time, and we had a very specific deadline for mastering and so forth so we could get this out for distribution on time. And I basically had like a weekend. That was it. And it was in China. So I didn't even have my whole setup. And I remember sitting down one morning, and I was feeling like pretty stressed about it because I wanted to help, but I was feeling like I didn't, you know how it is. I was jet lagged But I just said, Rada, look, just give me the morning. This is really important to me. I need to work on this. And I just pulled out the Nord, plugged everything in, and started trying things and I was on the plane too. I remember working on just some drum stuff and put something together, and we did some back and forth with Nick. And maybe used those limitations or something, or maybe it was like needing to do it quickly, or the fact that we're in China, or we had this distance, and we're just like, oh my gosh, we got to get this done by Friday. Let's just make some choices. And it came out awesome. It has this feeling like it's all the things he wanted it to be. I remember when he was describing it to me. I wish I had the piece of paper listing out the things he wanted. But the best thing about it is like when it ends, I want to just hit repeat. I want to hear it again. I want to be in that space. It's like groovy and ethereal all at the same time. So I couldn't be more happy with the result. And more importantly, I couldn't be more happy with having met Nick and getting to know him, because he's a great guy. And I'm sure hopeful that he and I will do something together in the future, or at the minimum, I can help him with his world and to dive into it more creatively, because I really enjoyed it before. So we will get into that in this episode, and I think you're going to love it. Could you give this episode a review? You just have to give it 5 stars if you're on the Apple platform, Apple Podcasts. You don't even really have to give it a written review, but those ratings go a long way. So thanks for just doing that now. If you've done it already, I'm pretty sure you can do it again. Just scroll down there, give it a 5-star review. Makes me feel good and helps other people take a risk on listening to this podcast, and all that put together helps me get cooler and cooler guests. They're all cool. It helps them say yes, because they're like, oh, this looks legitimate. And we're just having one great conversation, singing one another awake, co-conspiring to the great cosmic center as we walk each other home. Otherwise, I am preparing for this Australia tour, which really right now has meant trying to figure out how to fit all this into smaller and lighter luggage. They have very restrictive things going on over there. 15 pounds for the carry-on. I'm used to carrying a lot of like my delicate stuff as carry-on, but it's usually quite a bit more weight in the U.S., close to like 44 pounds. Don't tell the airlines that, but I always pretend it's really lightweight. And they're pretty cool about it. Delta's cool, but when I get over there, it looks like it's going to be tighter. So I'm doing lots of weighing and configuring, and then lots of rehearsing, because I'm trying to do some new things with the set that I'm excited about. But I'm, of course, coming into some computer things, and I've been on the phone with some friends who are the computer wizards, being like, please, can you do a voodoo ritual from afar so my computer will not have glitchy sounds? And do some kind of spell with lizard's tongue and dragon breath so we can appease the Macintosh gods. As you can imagine, that's not too fun. And then I also had, like, on the super analog level, a piano tech over today working on the 2 pianos, because one of them's got a buzz and the other one's a really old lady. She's 97, and she has a lot of new parts, like you put a pacemaker in someone and they can keep going. Like, it has new hammers and it got new strings 40 years ago, but it needs some more work. It needs some more surgery. So that was actually positive, because he's like, the piano tech you want is like the kind of surgeon you want. That's the kind of piano tech you want. You want a guy who's kind of serious and a nerd and knows his stuff. This guy can't take a joke, and you know what? That's okay. He makes me feel good, and he's like, I know how to fix this. All right, we need to do this. We need to do that. You don't want to do this, and idiots do this. And I'm like, it's fantastic, brother. You do your thing. You sing your song. Let me help you do it. So lots of things going on. But I'm getting lots of good saunas in the new sauna. My God, is that amazing. I can't recommend to all you enough. If you have the wherewithal to build a wood-fired sauna, do it. It's just a box that you insulate and then put in the wood stove to code. Do that right. But it will change your life. I cannot recommend that enough. So we've been having some great saunas. So I've been doing that, and I've been rehearsing, and I'm just trying to de-stress, being a part-time stepdad, PTSD, all those sorts of things. Let's drop into this. I'll see you in Australia soon, by the way. If there's some dates, they're selling quick, but if you haven't got a ticket, get it now, eastforest.org/tour. Going to be there in February. Looking forward to it. All right, this is my conversation with Mr. Nick Mulvey. You're in Ibiza?
I am indeed, yeah.
So is that just a place have you moved there for part of the year, or is this just kind of somewhere you wanted to go for a little bit?
I'd say it's an experiment that's going well. That's how I'm describing it at the moment. So it feels kind of permanent for us. Like, we moved. That's me, my wife, and 2 kids. In May last year, just like a few days after I finished the final touring of the last album. So moving here really coincides with kind of generating new music and a new chapter. And we were just exploring whether that would be a few months or something longer. And we've just found so easily our community out here and a lovely way of life and a kind of climate that feels really good. And yeah, it's a beautiful island.
And one thing I'll tell you before we get into this too deep, the microphone itself, if you could make sure it's not like rubbing against a beard or your clothing, because it makes little like crinkly noises, but that's pretty easy. Just kind of keep it hanging consistent distance or whatever. Yeah. This is our hi-fi audio setup. Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I haven't been to. How do you pronounce it? Is it Ibiza or Ibiza? Do I just sound like an idiot? Oh God.
Ibiza, yeah.
All right.
So you got that Spanish th on the Z.
People will roll their eyes if I said that here, but it's the way you say it. I hear you.
Yeah, man.
I got you.
Go local.
Go local. So I wouldn't have thought of that as a place really known for, like you're saying, community, a place of creative space. But I definitely hear you on the sunshine and warmth. But I'm hearing that this is actually kind of a place that you were hoping would engender some creativity and maybe is. Or at least is there a way of life that is engendering that?
Yeah, I always find that my creativity follows that kind of way of life thing. You know, if I'm happy and I'm grounded.
Me too.
And also if I'm stimulated and kind of, it's not, grounded. I need grounded in that, like, as David Lynch says, like, no matter how romantic it can seem, stress just isn't good for creativity. Mm-hmm. So I need to be grounded, but not in a kind of fixed sense. But yeah, coming to the island has been about exploring those things and a way of life thing. Yeah, like a warmer climate was a big part of it.
It's funny that stress is not conducive to creativity, which I generally agree with. But at the same time, I feel like limitations is good for creativity, like sort of, they're different things, obviously.
Yeah.
And, you know, I want to relate this, you know, the reason I was initially wanting to talk was because you did the great rework that for the Ram Dass project. And, you know, with that process, I kind of sensed like we got a chance to really process a bit as you were getting into it. And you seem like the kind of artist that likes to kind of dig around and process as part of the creative way of making your music, which I really honored and appreciated that sort of investigation. You know, some people, I know for myself sometimes I like to just dive in. And I really like that you really wanted to understand like themes and ideas and explore like, even musically, like it could be this or it could be that. And I have this, you used a lot of like metaphorical phrases, like something was embryonic, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
And I mean, what, let's just use this as an example. Like, was working on that rework, I know it was sort of a different process for you, but was that sort of how similar to like the way you tend to make music or your creative process in general? Or what similarities or differences were there for you?
I mean, I found it was quite an experiment, this piece. So in some ways, this was a lot about kind of different methods. Well, in some ways, different methods, like basically in the collaborative nature of it and the way we exchanged kind of different stages of the creation of the piece between you and I. But yeah, I'm sure then also some of my normal processes were there, and it's interesting to hear you reflect that back to me because these are kind of how it is for me, I think. How you describe it there. I think I probably am, as a writer, quite a process-based writer, you could say. Like I'm often like solving something or exploring something. There's often an inquiry. It's a kind of there's a key aspect of it, particularly in the most generative early stages, where I'm just flowing free, and I like as much as possible to for that to lead, to get as much ground covered in that non-cerebral stage as possible. But then there is this whole other aspect of puzzling it out, and it really engages my mind. I relish that. Like, you know, you get to these kind of places in the writing where it's like, okay, I am talking about the feminine principle, and I need a series of images that are, you know, short syllables, or no, but perhaps long syllable sounds ending in vowels, images of motion. You know what I mean? So it's like I need images that describe, you know, moving images, swaying images that have certain vowels. You know what I mean? I'm making this up off the top of my head, but it can be, or in fact, that actually was similar to something I've been working on recently. And I get to these places, and then it can be really, then I can go back to this kind of game of chance, because I might have whatever book or magazine or something around, and I know that I can just open the page and I will find what I'm looking for, because I've become so specific in what I want.
Well, maybe this was particularly challenging for you because there wasn't a lot of lyrical content that you were doing on your end. And I know we sort of talked about that and explored it, but you tend to be someone who, when I listen to your music, there's a real intensity and investigation to the lyrics, you know, and like you're saying, the imagery of the words and how they flow together and the sounds of them. And what I think is, honestly, just to give you props, like what is really cool about this track is how you kind of vocally take a back seat, but the thing we used is actually so evocative. Just that phrase, like when it first comes in, it's like, whoa. It's kind of like this, this ethereal energy just gets dropped in, and it's just enough, you know?
Amazing. Nice. Yeah, I did try a lot of different vocal ideas, but none of them were sticking. And in amongst them, when I did that kind of ad-libbed, you know, non-lyrical sound, it felt the most right. It felt really right. It felt very good.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a kind of balance, because, you know, it was working with the existing kind of vocal of Ram Dass, my great hero. We can get into that more in a bit, but as a kind of material, as a kind of texture in purely in the sound, working with his vocal meant that there was a presence in the top line. There was a presence in that kind of, like, you know, the pinpoint end of
right,
of who's communicating. But I didn't just want to be there in the guitar, although the guitar line has a lot of my signatures.
And it's quite prominent. Yeah.
It's quite prominent. And so I'm glad that we had something. But yeah, I tried lots of other lyrical ideas. And I think I am really kind of picky at, like, it's a dance. Like I can get to passages in the writing process, some periods in my life, even in a broader sense, where like that's all coming really easily. It's really the plumbing is done, if you know what I mean. Like it's flowing, and that's kind of ideal. So yes, there is, for me, the lyrics have to be just right. I can't just say whatever.
Yeah, of course.
But also that doesn't mean that I want to be kind of all over it with my mind, kind of cleaning it all up, measuring it all. I don't want to be too measured. I can get into spaces where it's flowing without too much of my kind of rational guidance, and yet it feels just right, and it's hitting that, like, it's just right spot that I'm also looking for.
Yes, your songs definitely have a cohesiveness in the fact that there seems to be that balance point with your themes and your lyrics. They do have a cohesive glue. You know, like phrases like "fever to the form." I mean, there's something about that that's unique, but also you can interpret that a few different ways. And I'm sure for you, when you were coming up with this stuff, I'm guessing it came out of a kind of free form, intuitive place. It's sort of like these phrases come to you, but then it also had a real like saliency that you just start building off it, right?
Yeah,
And then
exactly
it
that.
sort of it becomes the linchpin of like a story that's also a poem in a way, because it's sort of like, well, you can take this a few ways, but not so much that it's just gobbledygook, you know?
Right.
Yeah,
It's a feeling piece. It's a feeling piece.
I love that.
And yeah, and it's got to have enough, you know, it's got to have enough sense made so it's not gobbledygook. But I'm really trying to I'm just trying to just satisfy the mind so that like it sits down and is happy over there, and we can get on with the more embodied process of really letting those feelings, and then there is where the richness of the piece is.
Yes.
I think with that example you give, and a lot of my work, yeah. Yeah.
Well, you talk about music as a form of self-inquiry, and you're certainly exploring themes lyrically about sort of non-duality and these spaces. But that's interesting. Are you kind of dancing in that space lyrically so that the music can kind of take that non-language space and really just dive into feeling? Is there a particular feeling like you're trying to engender in your music, or do you let each song go where it wants to go?
Yeah, that feeling and the flavor is a song by song thing. But yeah, each song definitely has its own tone, and I'm then just looking to really inhabit that and express that feeling, and the language is always primarily in service of that, with the exception of one song which I've ever written, which was on my last record, where it was the only time I had a subject matter in advance that I wanted to write about, and that's a song called Mayella, which addresses the refugee crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had an approach and a kind of more journalistic approach where I found online archives of refugees describing their experience in their own words and telling their stories. And this song, and in these details of names and places and objects, like kind of jumped out to me as I explored these stories. And that was the one time where I've kind of had a decision from the beginning about something. Normally it's the other way around, and I'm exploring and following and allowing, and therefore I discover what the song is about, just like the listener, and I'm the first audience member, is how I always think of it.
Do you think of music or your music as a form of activism?
Yeah, I do. I do.
What does that look like for you? I mean, with that song, obviously, it was quite intentional and specific. But sometimes, does that activism take the shape of sort of stirring the spirit? Or like, I always believe that the kind of change we're looking for in the world is coming from the inside out. It's one soul at a time, one being at a time. So by sort of inspiring people and letting them explore that inner space, hopefully we're, from that, they start to make choices in their life that have to do with our connectedness together as people and compassion and so forth and service.
Yeah.
But I have seen a through line with you at times with sort of this like with social themes and spiritual themes in your music.
Yeah, I think the spirituality and activism are very, very fused, deeply fused. I think it was the Dalai Lama said, if you don't think spirituality is political, then you don't understand spirituality. And by virtue of the times we're living in, like it's great privilege of being, perhaps white or perhaps male or perhaps all the other things that allow you to think, oh, spirituality is a separate thing and it's not, or life is not political, or like, you know what I mean? Because I'm not getting stopped and checked by the police when I just want to go about my life, right, for example. So yeah, I'm like on this one side, like following my feelings with the music, and I don't I'm not leading with my agendas, and yet when I allow my subconscious space to rove and roam, like my interests and what my life is full of, like naturally starts to populate my songs, and that is often about deeper self-knowledge, themes of non-duality, themes of self-inquiry. And I do think that goes right to the heart of activism today, not in a kind of old school sense, perhaps. Like I grew up going to these kind of like demonstrations where it was like, very much like often quite, there's a lot of aggression between police and demonstrators. And I really am very deeply connected with the evolution of protest to this sense of protection, as kind of, I believe, outlined and sort of, kind of proliferated most sort of beautifully and effectively by a lot of indigenous presence around the world, but indigenous presence particularly in North America at all the front line of the climate crisis and various aspects of ecological crisis, but also social crisis. And I think I heard Naomi Klein talking to Russell Brand, and she was saying perhaps people in Europe don't often consider that in America, more often than not, whenever you get these like ecological battlefields, they have this like indigenous presence right at the heart of them. And with that comes this sense, this very practiced sense of connection with the sacred, connection with the land, sacred activism, reverence for life and the land and all of that. And that really sparked something in me, and I thought she was really right with that observation about perhaps European perspective. At least for myself, I hadn't considered that. And watching things like Standing Rock in 2016 really, really, really touched me very deeply and sort of pulled me forward as a person, pulled me forward as someone who was really, on this journey of like taking these sacred transcendental ideas that I was interested in quite comfortably, and actually realizing how much I need to turn up in my incarnation, turn up in my life,
Right.
Yeah.
And as artists, I don't know how else to turn up sometimes other than to transmute it through like our own creative sensibilities and share it with the world, and hopefully something in there forms inspiration for others. Because it can feel like at times that you're right. In some ways, most things can trace back to a form of theft that happened with native indigenous people, with land and space. Everything has been taken, and that's part of our history, right? That's whether we like it or not. That traces back to my affluence and my ability to even make music and sit here and talk about spiritual ideas. Is the fact that people before me came and did some pretty rough things. They stole things, essentially. And so what do we do with that? And for some people, I think that takes form, like you said, as direct activism. And for others, the kind of activism, like when I'm asking you if you see music as activism, it's something I think about, because I never want to feel like there's a spiritual bypass going on where I'm sort of, you know what I mean? Like you're using it as an excuse for actual action. And at the same time, I recognize what my gifts are. And there's a reason why we each have our unique gifts, and sort of the way we serve our incarnations and serve one another and be in service is going to be unique. And cracking that code sometimes involves things that have to do with making your art. Art in the world has a way of stopping the gears in your mind and letting us peer behind the curtain.
I mean, I think it's a very tangible and real thing to observe and understand that kind of right at the heart of all of this kind of crisis and catharsis and the epochal shift and just so much going on right now. It is an evolution of consciousness, is an evolution of, it can go right to the heart of who we think we are, what we think we are. And so, yeah, I find like allowing my art to go there, and then therefore like my live shows, my tours, they become rooms and spaces of, the last tours were kind of 1,000+ people in different spaces around Europe. And we're really like making a space where it's not just cerebral. We're not just like entertaining these new ideas. It's like, it's much more space opens up. So there can be grief. There can be all kinds of things comes up. Great celebration and jubilation, intense kind of energy exchange. And it's all like a kind of an inquiry, a kind of a sharing around, like right on the edge of this kind of shift, I feel. And so like, yes, this is activism, like there are very many ways to be engaged in this evolution at this time, and I think we all need to be, and there are many ways, and probably which most of us can be more, myself included. But a lot of it is frontline. I don't want to bypass around that, Like I had a friend the other day who was just talking, maybe it's a bit overdone, but it is kind of like, it does jolt you into something when he himself is Jewish, and he was talking about, the 1930s and would it be enough to kind of just be a good person in the 1930s and like look after be kind to everyone you meet and just kind of, or do you need to actually just like recognize that there is some gnarly shit going down and you need to really sometimes put your body in the way, or, really like kind of perhaps radically like shape your life in a different way to kind of address properly this moment, So he's radicalized, that friend. And he's living that. And I see the wisdom in that, actually, in some ways in this time. So yes, there is. I'm definitely not wanting this kind of discussion around the more kind of artistic aspects of activism to overlay the fact that there is concrete frontline action needed. But yeah, there are many, many ways in which that action can happen. And also, like, I also am aware that, like, that I don't think these times need us to be burdened and obliged. I'm following my joy here. I'm following my absolute delight in making music. It's my juiciest, happiest offering. And that I do feel is wise at this time. There's a great phrase I like from that German poet whose name I can't pronounce, Goethe. Goethe.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I always see quotes by him and they're just gorgeous. I should read one of his poems one day.
Yeah, they're good. Romantic.
Goethe said, I hope it's him who said it now, because I'm just going to make a fool of myself.
He's dead. He won't be too upset.
Okay, cool. And everyone else is forgiving?
Yeah, he's been there a really long time. Most likely we're misquoting most of him. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, maybe I've even got this right. But Goethe or someone said, ask not what the world needs, but what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. So I'm coming alive with my music, and I believe that is a very valid and total offering.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's shift to talk a little bit about Ram Dass, and I know that's initially what brought us together, and you had a relationship to his work, as did myself, and as did a lot of people. Did that play a role for you early on in your own process of awakening and your spiritual journey?
A big one. And just as we launch down this path, I just want to, while we're on the record, Krishna, just thank you for inviting me to this collaboration and creating this piece of music with you.
Well, the honor was all ours. Thank you.
Creating this piece of music with you and Ram Dass. You know, I'm completely, I'm overjoyed by every aspect of this project and delighted by what we've made and delighted by, you know, and we can get into the energy around the timing of the release just before Christmas and of course his passing from the physical form.
Yeah,
it's so many cool things have happened. Yes, man. So I was probably in my mid-20s when I kind of suddenly switched on to Ram Dass. I was already interested in sort of formalizing these feelings I've had since I was a mid-teenager of, every moment is kind of extraordinary. And I remember thinking we're apes in space, you know, and I remember thinking that all of my heroes who were then kind of like Stevie Wonders and Bob Marley's, they all had, I started to realize they all had a strong spiritual message. Even Paul Simon, you know, like he plays around with very worldly themes as well, Paul Simon, but often he would talk about this is the story of how we begin to remember. This is the powerful pulsing of love in our veins. I remember that particular passage from Under African Skies on Graceland being this epiphany moment for me as a younger, even like 13, where I was like, I understand what he's saying. And therefore I can understand songs. Before that, songs have been like, I don't really understand what songs are. And this was like, I'm in. And so those early years of music, but always linked with a kind of spiritual sort of, you know, energy, grew into just these intuitions, and then a kind of like inquiry as a young man, you know, into being interested in Buddhism and Hinduism, and then different teachers along the way, from Osho to Osho was an early one for me. I found his book on creativity when I was like 16, and I was just like, yes, please. And
what about psychedelics?
Yeah, total key part of it. You know, like it always made sense to me when from cannabis to then we bought some psilocybin off the internet. I probably got the receipt somewhere. Yeah, we did. Yeah. But when you could, we just bought mushrooms off the internet when I was like,
I didn't know you could.
16. Yeah, I got a receipt somewhere in mine, and it's probably too much information, but that's how it was.
Not at all.
And that lessened my sense of like, I had no idea what was about to drop that night, as anyone who's never taken it does. And also the fact that we bought it so kind of like officially, completely like disarmed the young me who was about to have his complete paradigm shifted. But it was all a remembering. It was all a remembering and a deeply, you know, yes, you have to navigate the arc of the experience with the kind of gnarly bit where you're finding your feet and it's weird. But definitely I was through to fields of bliss and deep. We took a big dose as well, me and my friend, in his bedroom. And his dad was downstairs who knew what we were doing, and he was just coming up and checking. And he has some funny stories he shared years later, but about us. And anyway, that was a life-changing moment when I was 16, and then on from there. So those have always been in parallel. And then there's more I could say around that, but getting to the Ram Dass point.
Well, it's connected. Yeah, Ram Dass is sort of a psychedelic grandfather in a way. And so for a lot of people, they see how for him, psilocybin started his whole journey, and he has his foot in that world. So I know for a lot of folks, they either like sympathize with that or it inspires them to explore that space too. And it can be a really powerful, sometimes way of people kickstarting spirituality, just because, like you said, it really rocks the whole paradigm of what your life is, what you perceive consciousness to be.
With a whole ton of bliss and a whole ton of wonder and fear and a lot of it. But yeah, psilocybin is my friend too. I can confer with the big man. And so I suppose a key person in my story with Ram Dass is a longtime friend of mine called Jamie Catter.
Oh, I know Jamie.
I know you know, yeah.
A little bit.
And of
Yeah.
course, I know you met him at the least, and yeah, Jamie is he's known for various chapters in his life. He started an influential band called Faithless in the 90s, who had big hits, and yeah, kind of a dance, dance music act, amazing, like legendary British act, still going. And then he went on to do other things and different, a documentary musical project called What About Me? And so through art scenes in London as a youngster in my early 20s, I became friends with Jamie, and he's a bigger brother. He really is an older brother.
That's great.
In senses to me, yeah. And I knew that he was really into this guy Ram Dass, but I hadn't quite switched on. And it was actually his aforementioned documentary called What About Me that features interviews with Ram Dass that really was the initial sort of that tilled the soil, got me ready for when I really switched on to him a few years later. But Jamie's well known now for a film he released just recently called Becoming Nobody,
right? Which
the whole Ram Dass community, I'm sure, is quite aware of, and beyond, I'm sure too. And that's a very recent film that Jamie's made, a documentary all about Ram Dass, because he spent time with him.
Yes.
And had these great one-on-one conversations filmed and recorded with Ram Dass about 10 years ago, and put them together into this great documentary piece.
Well, it's great that you guys, I didn't realize you had some history together. It went back. Yeah,
it goes back to my mid-20s, but yeah. And so one day, I can't remember quite what the trigger was, but one day I just watched or listened to a Ram Dass talk on YouTube, and it was just a kind of floodgates. It was such a yes. I was no doubt hypnotized happily by the eloquence and the charm and the humor of Ram Dass, and that phrase, "He is the bait and Maharaj is the fisherman, and therefore I'm the fish," and a lot of us are. I think was probably applied here. And I was delighted, and I was delighted by as I said, like his manner and his humor, but also just like the realness and the depth of technique and the depth of description of deep human experience and the depths of the transcendental planes and all of Ram Dass's kind of psychology data stuff, where he's talking about the channels, flipping between the different channels of consciousness. Mm-hmm. I just mainlined it, and I really see that. And this was after I released my first album, First Mind, where all my spiritual inclinations were kind of veiled. They're there, and they're there in the music, in the non-cognitive and in the non-lyrical ways, in my desire to create kind of hypnosis, or my desire to speak to your subconscious and to work with repetitive hypnotic patterns. All of that's just like right there from the beginning for me. But to begin to explicitly explore this stuff, it was all veiled in my first album. But then I think really through then mainlining Ram Dass, this is 2014, 2015, and things that Ram Dass led me on to, like Ramana Maharshi, that and then really started to look into what Ramana Maharshi gifted us with self-inquiry. Like that all started to actually really, like I'm a total beginner, and I don't want to give any impression otherwise, but like a basic grasp of like, okay, so like I am the witnessing awareness, the kind of sorting out of mind. Abiding, of mind and of world and of self. That really came in that time. Like it was already there, beginning to happen. And of course, like I forget it every day that I get entangled in the world when I do. But just kind of sorting it out and getting a basic grasp on all of that. What spiritual practice is, therefore, what came in that time. Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. I heard a phrase yesterday from the Radiant Sutras. It's a book of the ancient yogic text by Lauren Roche, and it was unmind your mind. And it's something from one of the ancient texts. It's like, that's a great way of thinking about it.
Brilliant.
Thinking about it. Yeah, man. So when you were going through this process in your 20s, sort of the early investigations. That's when you were in Portico Quartet, and you eventually made that decision to go solo. Was this sort of all enmeshed into the same process?
The times I'm talking about specifically here now are a few years later,
Mm-hmm.
and I've left Portico Quartet, and this particular time was after my first solo album, First Mind, and before my second album, Wake Up Now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And when I read that you went to Cuba as part of studying music, was that at that time, or was that before all this?
No, Cuba was a good chunk before this time I'm talking about. I was really, a kid then, really. I was 18 going on 19. And I just wanted to travel. And through a friend of a friend, I heard about this school in Cuba, and it just lit something up in me. And I was able to go and essentially knock on the front door and buy myself a place there and be there. And then,
Wow.
and stayed there, almost 8-9 months. And it was a really formative experience for me as a youngster. And I played every day for hours, and I was immersed in a lot of different influences and loved it.
It's the guitar styling that actually you're doing on the rework track would you say it's a bit more African or something? It's like we said, it's very prominent in the recording, and it's such an interesting, joyful kind of somewhat polyrhythmic thing. I mean, I ended up putting this delay on it that you asked for that made it even more sort of complex and deep, which I thought was kind of a cool idea.
Yeah. Yeah, you almost just took the same kind of iterating pattern out to another kind of another few degrees, if that makes sense to anyone.
It's just some fancy delays.
Yeah. I mean, so that question leading on from the Cuban thing, just to be clear, I never took a lot of direct, explicit influence from Cuban music. You wouldn't hear that in what I do.
Okay.
But I think I probably did from African guitar playing, of which, of course, I got very interested in African guitar playing, be that West African desert stuff or, Congolese stuff, or then Southern Zimbabwean stuff, like very different guitar cultures between them. And I went all in, I was an undergrad in ethnomusicology in London at a school called the School of Oriental and African Studies. So I had 3 years where I just was really living this kind of stuff. And but what's interesting for me as well is that when I think back to some of the patterns I first made and I picked up the guitar before I knew much about African music, when I was about 16, I made some patterns then that years later I kind of revisited, and they all have the same hallmarks of the African music that I'd never really heard then. So the truth is that I love repetitive, cellular, kind of like often hypnotic,
Yes.
cellular, trans-cellular music, right? Which is to do with, actually, it's deeper than any genre or any geographical thing. It's to do with our nervous system, to do with our anatomy, to do with music and the physics of sound and the physics of the instruments, and what happens to our physiology when that all happens. That's the thing I've always just got off on, like a lot of human beings, let's be fair.
Well, me too. Yeah.
And therefore I then loved those principles wherever I best heard them expressed, which was a lot in African guitar sound. But then I was really loving all kinds of electronic music and things like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, of course, do express some of those same principles as well. So I was loving Steve Reich and American minimalism, kind of modern classical stuff since I was a teenager. And I loved hip hop. I loved, so I don't want to get too general, but these principles are core, deep ones, and they do go, through a lot. They transcend genre, and so those kind of principles are in my guitar playing, and they can often sound African, and there is an African influence, but it's also deeper and prior.
Yeah, it's so cool. You're kind of doing something that I approach with on the keyboard, this idea of a repetitive phrase and how something about the phrasing and the harmonics is kind of inducing that sort of relaxing trance, kind of pulls your mind in a sideways direction. It makes me think of something I read about when you were working with Brian Eno. Was he called it like horizontals, or this idea of like he was having you to sort of sit with certain chords for a long time? Was that sort of an idea of like going deeper into this idea that you're talking about?
Yeah, it was definitely this kind of terrain. He shared with me just a really sort of like insightful key. In fact, he kind of got in, when we were initially getting in touch with each other. He said, "Actually, I've got a key for Nick," which was for me was super exciting.
And he did. Musical key for you?
Well, it was sort of unspecified actually, but yes, it was a musical key, and it was something that he learned when he was producing Talking Heads, and they were crazy about Fela Kuti, and it essentially expressed in a very pithy, I think, Brian Eno kind of way. It is familiar chords for unfamiliar durations. And what that means is that you can have a familiar musical space chord, let's say, like you're jamming on a chord. And when you're interested in this kind of linear, repetitive music, staying on a chord and then, for a long time perhaps, and then moving away as a release for a short time and then coming back would be an example of familiar chords for unfamiliar durations. It's like a kind of way. Yeah, it's a way of navigating this kind of approach. Because, some combinations of patterns, when repeated, get bored within a few iterations, and they leak energy with every iteration. And other combinations of patterns gain energy with every iteration. And I've always been very interested in like, okay, well, what is that? Why does that happen? Why do some things just get better and better and could go forever? And indeed, I think it's an important thing to say that in a sense they do go forever, because they are actually describing they are out of time. They are kind of the now, these patterns. They have something about them that, and they hide in plain sight in popular music. Stevie Wonder tracks often get to a place where he's just jamming out and the track fades, and it's as if they're forever in the studio going round and round that loop. And so I think the key that Brian Eno gave me there was relating to that, about how to make repetitive patterns that build in energy and retain energy rather than leak and get tired.
It seems to have a lot to do with cultivating a feeling, like as sort of a primary importance in recording a song, which I can certainly relate to. That's something I'm always always aiming for more than anything, is like, well, is the feeling there, is the vibe there? Because that's really what each song is doing, is cultivating a certain feeling in the listener. Yeah. And that's sort of, to me, the whole point. The lyrics support that, the melody supports that, everything, the reverb, like the track that you did on the Ram Dass reworks, when I was helping you mix that, the feeling it has is what's so beautiful about it. Is it's sort of like, it is ethereal and emotional and timeless, but then it has this sort of energy and modern edge. And when it's done, I just want to hit repeat. It's sort of like, oh, I want back in that space. I want to go again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it has that, like, it could just keep going in a way,
It's been cool to hear quite a few people say that, actually. Like, a lot of people hit it on repeat. And
well, I can tell from the stats, it seems to be doing really well. People like the track. It's one of my favorites on the whole thing.
I'm so happy, man. I'm so happy. Like, the whole thing, as I say, it felt good from the start. It felt like a really nice kind of, personally, like a cool step in my journey with Ram Dass. And I'm aware of, like, there's a lot of spiritual stuff, like, and Ram Dass himself talked about it in later years, about like people want this validation from the big man, or there's a lot of that I'm kind of aware of, that like but I also come back to a kind of an innocent place where I was just delighted that I've had this sense of like intimacy with Ram Dass since I was like that point when I started to absorb a lot of his teachings, and then a kind of amazing thing happened to me where it was totally at that time I was touring my first album then in in the States, and I needed to really simplify my life. Things had gotten a bit too kind of busy, and things were going really well with the music, but I needed less people around me. So I decided to just take everything back to being on the road with just me and my wife driving with one guitar. She was just a companion on the road, selling the merch with me, and I used in-house sound engineers with in every venue, and I kind of, you know, let go of my band for a bit, and just we went on a road trip, and I was still touring the album. And after the San Francisco gig, someone came up to me and gave me an old copy of his wonderful book, The Only Dance There Is, and she signed it like, "With love from San Francisco." And I was delighted, because I was like, wow, that's really funny. This is just the guy I'm getting into. And maybe I didn't know that Ram Dass was as prevalent as he is and was then, but I was amazed anyway. I was like, oh, that's the perfect gift. And the next morning we're driving to the airport, and we're kind of like late for the flight, and we're bickering. And it was a bit of a kind of tense moment. And like, you have way less signs on your freeways in America. And it's kind of, it's really difficult for an English driver, because we're used to like loads of signs and loads of warnings. And like, we missed the turning to the airport, and we're like pushed for time now. We had to go around a loop, and we were fighting. And in amongst this fight and this tension, my wife took a crazy decision across the freeway, like just yanked the car across loads of traffic. And I had this near-death experience on the way to the airport, where like all of this traffic was coming towards me, and it was from the gut. It was just like, no, I am not ready to die, some kind of scream. And we narrowly avoided death, and we just shell-shocked kind of made our way, still pushing for time, to drop off the car in the airport, and got on the internal transport system to the terminal, and the doors of the train opened, and there in front of me was Krishna Das.
What?
He was right there. Yeah, he was standing right there, like Krishna Das, and with all his bags and you know, some sunglasses on, and like and I was amazed, and I was a fan. You know, I'd really been switched on to him as well in my journey to Ram Dass. And I really had a fanboy moment, and I went up to him, and he was really nice. And I said to him, you know, oh, it's really mad. I just played last night's show. It was just the day after, you know, the show in LA, and someone gave me this book of Ram Dass, and he smiled and was like, I've just come from being by his side in Maui. And I've just got off the plane now, you know. And so I was suitably sort of delighted, and like, I'm really touched by it. And, you know, and I love to kind of, it's almost as interesting for me to remain open to the fact that this could be a meaningless coincidence. Like, I like to remain open to that. And yeah, I'm totally kind of seduced by this one. I'm like, it was amazing. And it really, it's one of these steps that really kind of just like built this intimacy with Ram Dass that kind of furthered when I posted some stuff on Instagram about how much I enjoyed the album and how much I was enjoying your conversation with Aubrey Marcus on his podcast. And then you saw that and got in touch, and then, hey presto, we're in collaboration. And
yeah,
I'm just I'm charmed by the whole thing, man.
That's the meaningless coincidence. Give me a break. It's like so.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now I've said that, I can completely now dive in and talk.
I love it. I love it, brother. It's like, it's so, I mean, the whole journey is just like, I can't help but laugh of it, because like, you're right. It was like, I saw you post something about the record, and I almost never see these things, period, on social media. I'm hardly engaged with it, let alone recognize anything about who it is. And for some reason in my brain, I was like, huh, Nick Mulvey, that sounds familiar. And I clicked on your thing, and I was like, oh yeah, I think I know this guy. And then I was like, I reached out to, so we should reach out to this guy, see if he wants to maybe, you know, follow the breadcrumbs here. And here we are talking, and all these wonderful things have happened. And my heart tells me that it's really just the beginning. And I just keep laughing at how it all unfolds. So it's been a total pleasure.
You know, we can follow that for a second more if we let go of this sort of reasonable, irrational caution and like, you know, open, you know, to the idea that in a sense, Maharaji is in charge, you know, like Maharaji, Ram Dass's guru, you know, that's not a kind of like, you know, indulgent thing to say if we understand, like, you know, really what is meant by Maharaji, and what, you know, Maharaji is this living incarnation, Ram Dass's guru, like in human form of you know, the universe and life itself, right? I don't think I need to unpack that or you know, or explain that necessarily if I have time, or you know, but the universe then is unfolding lawfully. The universe is in charge. It is what Maharaji is in charge is tantamount to saying. And so then, with that in mind, then like how it played out, you know, just before Christmas, 20th of December, just gone, a month ago, less than, was profound.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Every step of it. I mean, I've spoken a bit on this podcast about obviously Ram Dass a lot, but his passing and how it's aligned just with my own personal process with this record. And I'm still processing what all that means, because it's hard to wrap my head around. And so I've just stopped trying and I just keep feeling it. And
yeah,
the way the music is serving a role for so many people in connecting with Ram Dass, and will continue to do so, that's beyond me, beyond you, and we kind of do our part, serve our part, is just so beautiful. And now how it's continuing to give more gifts, even in its like sister energy, like the fact that you and I have been connected and all these other connections I've made that will probably grow into other things, other lives, other webs and branches of the same tree. It's just it's so great. And I'm full of gratitude myself. And a lot of people are like, you know, tripping out on, oh, what was it like making this? You must be so happy. And it's like, yeah, but I don't understand it. I just kind of grateful, and you keep walking your walk and keep following where it leads. And it's just been beautiful.
I can only imagine from your side. Yeah. It's great work, brother, and a real gift and a real, you know, elegant vehicle for his teachings and particularly for these, you know, as you said before, like there's 50,000 hours of him already or whatever it is on YouTube, dispensing cutting edge, beautiful, timeless wisdom. But it's really meaningful that he's in this offering speaking about now. And so gracious. Yeah. So, you know, I'm not saying this is, I was really, really, really touched by the way it unfolded and, you know, us releasing it on the Friday. And then in my own channels, you know, like, I'm not saying it's, you know, in my own channels to my own people, having a moment to just talk about Ram Dass, who he's been to me, who he is in some succinct sentences, just in a few posts online. And then 48 hours later or less, hearing the news that he'd passed, and then seeing sort of the internet abuzz with all this kind of like talk about Ram Dass, and just to kind of feel within my communities and my networks and followers and friends, this kind of like this finger pop, this kind of like people feeling touched by the timing of this, by the kind of energy of this, and I just felt, well, I was so touched, and it was bang on the solstice. It was right on the solstice, and in that
all
solstice,
of it,
in that solstice, I had this kind of this non-normal moment, this kind of moment of just of rich imagery in my mind. But it was a kind of transcendental moment where I just kind of sat with the knowledge of his passing, and I just kind of saw this like this ascending, this sense of ascending, and this kind of like constellation, this of lines of light with these nodes between them, like a map of the stars or something. And I sort of felt Ram Dass like ascending into one, and this kind of like brilliant circuitry, this circuitry of awe and wonder and some constellation of light that I'm just going to ramble more words, you know, you kind of get the picture, but it lit me up, that's for sure. And I really sat with it, and I was in total stillness as I let that image flood me, and I really went there with it, and yeah, on the solstice.
Well, I get a chill thinking about it, and I feel it. It feels like a perfect way to close because there's nothing really to say. It's just a feeling.
Amen.
Yeah, man, I can't thank you enough for giving us some time, and I look forward to talking to you again. But thanks, brother. It's been cool.
Likewise, mate. And from the track to this conversation now, I'm so happy to be getting to know you, man.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
All right, man. Have a great day.
Well, there it is, Mr. Nick Mulvey. We are so fortunate to have some time with him. Love that guy. Can't wait till we can hang out in person and do more music together and share it with the world. Man, I love that track. That's what you're hearing in the background. This is the Please Pass the Bliss rework, Nick Mulvey rework. It's on the Reworks album that you can find on all those major platforms if you want to hear it without me jabbering over it and hear it in high resolution. The most high resolution would be at eastforest.org. You can download it in WAV format, and some of the albums you can download even higher than that. We're going to be in Australia soon. Thanks for telling your friends. Thanks for spreading the word. Thanks for sharing this podcast. Give it a 5-star review, or just, do what you need to do. Say hello, info@eastforest.org. Keep walking your walk, folks. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.
To learn. Our perception of the soul is love, 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 love. You love fellow souls. I love things. I love my wheelchair. I love my pain. I love you all. I love the whole universe. I love the whole universe. We love everyone by inhabiting the soul. We love everyone by inhabiting the soul.